Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the College Sports Hive. Once again, this is Leif and Scott Stevens with you. We're coming out of Salt Lake City, Utah. We're not necessarily in the exact same spot, but our apartments are pretty close to one another. So we're here bringing you some sports news, and hope you all enjoyed your college football weekend this weekend, wherever you were watching it from. It was a very entertaining one, to say the least. There was a lot of very close games, a lot of good matchups, and yeah, there's a lot to like, a lot that happened that we could have to unpack for you all today. Just a quick rundown of what we're looking at on the docket for this evening is we have 6 games that we're going to recap for you. It's going to be Clemson, Notre Dame to start off with, a thriller there in South Bend. Florida, Georgia, we're going to touch on that one. Michigan at Indiana, Arizona State at USC, the Stanford at Oregon game on ABC, and then to finish it off, it'll be BYU and Boise State that kicked off on Friday night to start our weekend off. We'll then have another segment where we can add some interesting notes that Leif and I both saw throughout the weekend, things that happened that might not be headline news, but we think are relevant or important for y'all to know. And then, of course, at the end, we'll update you all on how we did in our picks. It was an interesting pick weekend, to say the least. But so we'll have some fun with that near the end. But to start us off here tonight, we're going to jump into our recaps. We're going to start here with number 1 Clemson traveling to number 4 Notre Dame. This game was pretty much all you could ask for as a college football fan. Notre Dame won the game in double overtime by a score of 47-40. But this was just the thriller, wasn't it, Leif?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, we came in and said that if Notre Dame was able to score early, they had a real shot. And boy, did they ever. They scored early and often. They ran the ball like we predicted, but they also were able to get out of the pocket, use Book's legs, extend plays, and they found receivers to make more plays. They had their tight ends, their whole depth chart on display. They played a very strategic game, and they deserved to win that game. I thought they outplayed Clemson throughout it, and DJ, the 5-star quarterback for Clemson, played a heck of a game, and that's what made it close. But I thought Notre Dame was the better team throughout.
I do agree. I think Notre Dame really came out and especially from the get-go, showed that they wanted it a little bit more than Clemson did. I thought Clemson started a little flat. They had turnovers in the first half that proved very costly for them in the remainder of the game. If it's really interesting to break this game down a little bit further, because when you look at the team stats, I'll read some of them off for you. They are just as even as it can get. Total yards, Clemson had 473, Notre Dame had 519. Time of possession, Clemson had the ball for 29 minutes and 38 seconds. Notre Dame had it for 30 minutes and 22 seconds. Each team had exactly 22 first downs. So you're looking at a game that was very evenly balanced, evenly matched on both sides of the football. So it's very interesting to sit down and look at it to say what went wrong. If you're a Clemson fan, there's 2 things that stick out for me. It's they couldn't run the ball, and they had 3 turnovers.
Yeah, I mean, that's a recipe for disaster there. I mean, especially the biggest part is they couldn't run the ball, but they also had fumble that turned into a touchdown. So the 3 turnovers, one of them was for a score too. It wasn't just, oh, we threw a punt, like effectively a punt, and they score a touchdown out of it. And Notre Dame they were clinical. Their turnover didn't hurt them that much. And I mean, it hurt because Book couldn't score. But I mean, that made Clemson still, they gave it up at the 3-yard line into the end zone. So it was a really clinical game and very well game planned for Brian Kelly and company. And I wonder what Clemson would have done differently game planning, because I thought they came out of this game overmatched, and they were lucky to get back into it with some big plays, and then that fumble really gave them second life.
I really agree. I think it just seemed like Clemson wasn't necessarily ready to go from the get-go in this game. It looked like they were slow on both sides of the football. I mean, they only ran the ball for 34 total yards. That's just insanity. That's just
especially with who they have as running back.
Yeah, especially with Travis Etienne back there. I think that's coupled with a poor performance for Etienne, that matchup we touched on with Notre Dame's linebacker, I just think Notre Dame's entire defense played played an outstanding game. They did give up 40 points, but some of those points were just some miscommunications in the secondary, some deep balls that and like there's some throws that you just can't do anything about when there's a guy as talented as DJ on the other side. The dude threw for 439 yards and 2 touchdowns. He's the only reason they were in this football game is because of that big right arm of his. And that's just it's really intriguing when you sit back and look at the grand scope of this game and what it meant to both teams, and how a team like Clemson, who has the pedigree under Dabo Swinney, almost seemed like they weren't necessarily ready to play at the opening jump. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I mean, I think Notre Dame punched him in the mouth. I think this is what we talked about this at one point in the podcast where you were giving your prediction. You said Notre Dame's only chance is if they score on their first drive. And I think that was really proved true. I think Notre Dame coaches thought so too, based off the way they scored. Their first play was a play action, and they're scripted. They knew that Clemson thought, hey, if we pack the box, we're going to make Ian Book beat us. So that first drive, they came out and threw a bootleg, and then they got outside and didn't run up the middle. They pulled, and he ran. And Kyron Williams, who's an electric back, so his speed helped him there. But they dominated offensive line-wise. They pushed around those 2 freshman studs in Brissy and Murphy. But, I mean, seniors typically beat freshmen, and it proved true. And I think Clemson, not only did they come up flat, I think they almost felt like they should win even if they didn't give their best performance. And I think that's a dangerous mindset to have just because they haven't lost in 3 years. And I think it got the better of them.
Yeah, and I think Ian Book came out and had one of his better games. Statistically, he had a decent amount of incompletions, but he still threw the ball 22 times he completed passes 22 times and racked up 310 yards and a touchdown. And most importantly, he took care of the football. He did what he needed to do to keep his team moving down the field and didn't force the ball into bad situations and have that Clemson defense make any plays. I said in our preview episode, I thought we were going to see a much better performance from Clemson's defense. I thought they were going to be a little upset at how they performed against Boston College, but that didn't really turn out to be the case. I think they honestly, like, giving up 47 points to Notre Dame is a lot. That's a lot of points to give up. You can't necessarily expect with your second string QB to go into a game like that and give up 47 points and expect to win many of them. So I know it was double overtime and 2 of those touchdowns came in overtime, but still, it's one of those things that they have to look back on and say, if there is a weakness on this Clemson team this season, I do believe it is their defense, as well as it is Alabama and a couple other teams around the country. So it's interesting to talk about. A couple hypothetical scenarios I want to delve into here with this game is we asked the question in our preview episode, if this was a college football playoff eliminator. We both kind of agreed that it wasn't, but what happens from here necessarily? How high would you rank Notre Dame this week after that performance?
I think number 3 still. I think you got to say Bama's number 1 based off the body of the work. Ohio State, even though they've only played a few games, they've been really impressive. They've showed nothing to say that they shouldn't be above. So I think it goes Bama, Ohio State, Notre Dame. And I think Clemson will get the 4th spot. I think losing in double overtime without the best player in college football will still earn you the 4th spot even this week. I hate to say it, but I think there's really no team that – I mean, Cincinnati, we're both really high on them. We'll get to them later in this podcast, but I don't think anyone can say that they're better than Clemson, especially when Clemson gets back Trevor Lawrence. And then Oregon or anyone from the Pac-12, they're only playing 6 games maximum. That worries me, and I don't think 6 games is enough by the end to take away a playoff spot from Notre Dame or Clemson, whoever wins that impending ACC title game matchup, unless some real stuff happens that we don't foresee.
Absolutely, I agree. I think number 3 is a good slot to have them in. I would agree that makes sense, but I also wouldn't be surprised if they come in at number 2, just because Ohio State hasn't played that many games. I mean, there's going to be people around the country that said, oh, they beat the number 1 team in the land, they deserve to be number 1. You know what I mean? But I just think I had my worries about Clemson. I'm not going to say I wanted to call this game because I obviously picked Clemson to win, but I had my worries about Clemson even before they lost to Boston College. Before they got almost upset by Boston College. I thought there was holes in their team that necessarily weren't being exploited. And then it came to fruition against Boston College, and then it happened again in this game. So I'm not necessarily saying they shouldn't have been in the top 4, but I'm saying I'm not sure they were the number 1 team in the country coming into this game, in my humble opinion. So I would put Alabama number 1. I can see either Ohio State or Notre Dame being 2, and then the other one is 3. And then I agree. I don't think Clemson falls outside of the top 4. And another interesting point here is you look at what both of these teams have laying ahead of them the rest of the way. Clemson's off this upcoming week. They don't have a game, so they should have Trevor Lawrence coming back after their bye week from COVID leave. They only have 3 games left after that, though. They only have Florida State, Pittsburgh, and Virginia Tech. So they should all 3 be very favorable matchups for the Tigers moving forward. And then you flip-flop that, and you look at what Notre Dame's have left. They have probably the strength of the ACC outside of Clemson left on their schedule, with 4 games left, including one this weekend against Boston College, who we saw give Clemson everything that they can handle. Then they have North Carolina still, Syracuse, who always sneaks up and bites someone usually, and they played Clemson. They played Clemson hard as well, and then Wake Forest to finish their season. So they have 3, I would say 3 very, very important games left on their schedule. But also, if all goes according to plan, we're going to see this game one more time in the ACC championship game.
Yeah, I think you touched on 2 things, and I think it could go both ways. I think one is that Clemson was vulnerable, and you and I talked off camera with a friend of the program about how Clemson looked vulnerable, and we thought that Ohio State might be the best team both ways, because Alabama can put up points, Clemson can put up points, Ohio State can put up points, but Ohio State's defense looked the best of the 3. So we talked about that, and I thought, and we talked about it a little bit on the podcast, that I thought Notre Dame's, because of their physical offensive line, could establish the run and then take advantage of them, because they've got the bodies to match up with Clemson's athletes, whereas a lot of schools don't. So I think Clemson got a little complacent. They also were missing Trevor Lawrence, and that's a bad recipe when you play a competent, much more than competent team in Notre Dame. And then on the flip side, I think Notre Dame's got to really be careful. They can't afford to lose a game here, because if they play Clemson with Trevor Lawrence, a Clemson team that's going to be hungry and be like, hey, we were still double overtime without our star, and we didn't play what we consider a very good game. And so they can't lose any of those, because you could very well lose that game against Clemson. So I think Notre Dame's got to be really careful, especially against Boston College. Boston College's defense wasn't easy to shred for Clemson, and I don't think Notre Dame's as explosive as Clemson is offensively. And we saw that Jurkovich can throw the ball, and they come out to play. So Notre Dame's got to they can't take the foot off the pedal, because their spot isn't set just because they beat Clemson.
Absolutely. And to kind of transition our way through here, speaking of spots that aren't set anymore, let's move on to Georgia-Florida game. Georgia losing in this basically SEC East elimination game, and looking pretty subpar doing so, with giving up 44 points with that defense that was supposed to be, they are good. They're very talented, but I heard a stat when I was watching this game that they were averaging 40 points when they play Florida, Alabama, and there was one other team. So in these big games that they have to win and play well in, they are getting exploited on the defensive side of the ball. So with that being said, Florida did beat Georgia 44-28. That was the final there. Let's talk about Kyle Trask to start. What do you think of his performance?
I mean, he was incredible. I mean, this Georgia team is not devoid of talent, whether they show up against those top opponents or not. They're very, very talented. I think they were missing a few players, especially Richard LeCounte in the secondary, which hurt because he's their vocal leader. But Trask went crazy. I mean, he was 30 for 43 with 474 yards and 4 touchdowns against what's considered the best, and I think it is the best defense in the SEC. The craziest part is he spread it to everyone. He threw 4 touchdowns to 4 different receivers, and the 2 top yard getters on the day didn't score. So they had 6 players that were wildly productive in the game, and there was no stopping Trask in Florida for Georgia. And their quarterback situation wouldn't allow them to compete in this game. And I really wonder if there's going to be a change down the road for Kirby Smart.
Absolutely. You touched on what happened on the offensive side of the ball with Georgia. Stetson Bennett and DeJuan Mathis were the 2 quarterbacks. Stetson Bennett started the game, and and I think he was a combined 5 of 16 for 78 yards, 1 touchdown and 1 interception in the first half. Then Mathis kind of came in and replaced him and didn't do a whole lot better. 4 of 13 for 34 yards, a touchdown and 2 interceptions. I think two, like one of those interceptions at least was in garbage time, just trying to make something happen. So yeah, what do we see in this Georgia QB room moving forward?
I mean, to me, I think it's obvious. The best thrower of the football in that QB room hasn't touched the field. And whether his knee's healthy, whether he doesn't know the system, JT Daniels has to be on the field. They have too much talent. Yeah, they didn't have George Pickens, which matters in this game because he's an explosive and maybe the best receiver in the SEC, or among the best at the very least. And I mean, but it's still, they still have 5 stars everywhere. Kearis Jackson's really explosive. They have Demetrius Robertson and the 5-star tight ends. They've got so much talent, and they've got the best run game in the nation, possibly. Like they have the capacity to do that, but they can't run effectively after a while because they put 8 men in the box. So with all those athletes playing one-on-one coverages, you have to be able to exploit that, especially for a banged-up secondary like Florida. And Stetson Bennett and Dwan Mathis clearly couldn't. I just don't think they have the arm talent. Mathis can move, but he's too young and he doesn't necessarily throw the ball well enough. Bennett's issue is he just doesn't scare you down the field. So you're like, hey, dink and dump, and we're going to put people in the box and we're going to congest it. And JT Daniels is sitting there and wait. And I know I'm not alone in saying, why hasn't he touched the field? Because we saw him at USC, and he can throw a ball. Like, he can really throw the ball.
Yeah, I was talking with the people I was watching the game with, and I think there's rumors and grumbles that head coach Kirby Smart and JT Daniels don't necessarily have a very good relationship. There's some issues happening there, and that could be one of the reasons why he might not see the field yet. I do think there's still some concern about his knee, and because that was just a gruesome knee injury that he suffered there, and then he got pretty much just replaced at USC because they just churn out quarterbacks like it's nobody's business. But I do agree. I think he's got to get a chance. You know what I mean? Like, he can't be any worse than what they currently have, even if he doesn't necessarily know the system. I think it would be almost a little immature if like a grudge would be holding their team back from potentially playing someone that could make a complete difference to that offense. I think but also with that being said, if you're not going to get over that hurdle in this game, your biggest game of the year, this is your playoff contention, all of that elimination game, essentially. If you can't get over that grudge and that hurdle to play him in this game, I don't see why that would change moving forward. Because as of now, like, the best you can do is hope for a New Year's Six bowl game and play someone there, and that's not even a guarantee at this point.
Yeah, I don't even think they'll get that based off, like, they have 2 losses and neither of them are pretty. And honestly, part of the reason I took Florida, I mean, I took Georgia. We were talking, and I was like, wow, Florida's going to score. Like, I know they will. And part of the reason is I thought JT Daniels would come in the game. I really thought they had an ace up the sleeve. And as soon as Stetson Bennett struggled, I thought that JT Daniels was going to come in the game. It just made sense to me. Like, the Florida secondary is depleted. They've got so much talent at receiver. Let's throw the ball with one-on-one coverages, or we're just going to run with Zamir White, especially because the first play from scrimmage, he goes 75 yards to the house. And then you think, oh, wow, that's going to be a game over. They were up 14-0, and I was like, oh, and it's 14-14, and Bennett looks bad. I think they're bringing in Daniels. Like, I really believe that, and I'm stunned. And I guess a grudge may actually be what's holding back Georgia, because on paper, if you throw in the arm talent of Daniels, they may be better than Alabama, because Alabama's defense is lacking this year. They're better than Florida on paper, if you put in a quarterback that was competent. So it's stunning to me that can be what's holding back such a program that has such high aspirations.
I agree. One last thing on Georgia before we flip the narrative and talk about Florida a little bit. How far do we see them falling? Because they are now a 2-loss team. They've lost their 2 biggest games of the year. Do we see them? See them outside the top 10? Do they stay inside the top 10? What do you do with this Georgia team at this point?
I think they go to around 12. I think they have to fall. I think, for instance, Oregon's going to rise, BYU's going to rise, Cincinnati's going to rise. You can't penalize Wisconsin too much. Indiana's going to rise. I think a lot of these teams are going to go up, and Georgia, for two big and bad losses, they're going to be outside the top 10.
I agree. I think they're on their way. I think it could be even potentially further than that, looking at maybe like 15-ish. See what's happening around there. Let's flip the script and talk a little Florida on this moving forward. This was their biggest game of the year. This is the hurdle that they haven't really been able to take these last few years. They haven't been able to knock off Georgia and play and have them have the lead in the SEC East, essentially, with basically your pathway paved to play Alabama in the SEC championship game, and then the winner of that going to the college football playoff, and the loser is going to play in a New Year's Six bowl game, guaranteed, almost essentially. What do we think about Florida moving forward?
It made me annoyed at myself, but it's like I said last podcast. I think they have just as much talent as Alabama, and they really could give Alabama a shot. And why I took Georgia, I don't know. So that was silly of me. But I said that last podcast, and I truly believed it. And I really do think, like, if they play Alabama, it's whose defense can come up with a stop. Because Trask and Mac Jones, the quarterback for Alabama, and Kyle Trask for Florida, they're going to put up points. And both teams have crazy amounts of weapon, great offensive line play. And neither defense is great. So whoever's defense can improve more has a really good shot of making the playoff. Because if Florida can beat Alabama, they have a very legitimate claim that they should be a playoff team. And in fact, I would bet if that were to happen, they would be. So I think they're a real contender.
Yeah, I agree. I think that it's going to be interesting to see what happens with Texas A&M moving forward. But that's the team that did beat Florida. So it'll be interesting to see what happens there, but also at the same point in time, like, the pathway is laid like on a golden platter for Florida to take advantage of it. They are past their biggest hurdle. They have nothing but green grass in front of them moving forward in a sense. So I think the sky's the limit, at least at this point, until they would have to play probably their best game to, I think, really compete and have a chance to beat Bama. But at that same point in time, like, that's definitely within the realm of the possibility at this point. I just don't think I've seen enough to say that they would be able to, like, guaranteed go out and hold their own. But Kyle Trask is proving each and every week that he is for real. He's a Heisman contender. And you look at the flip side of that with Mac Jones, I think that would be a matchup that a lot of college football fans and pro scouts are going to be drooling to see. Speaking of pro scouts, let's take a flip-flop and move on to number 23 Michigan at number 13 Indiana. What do we think the scouts are talking about when Michael Penix Jr. is brought up?
That's an interesting one, because to me, I don't think he has the arm talent in terms of the way he throws the ball or decision making of Kyle Trask or Mac Jones, but those are two of the top guys on scouts boards, in my opinion. Penix has this mobility, and he's got this swagger about him. He makes this Indiana team go, as all good teams do. They have a quarterback that's their leader, but he seems like a leader both like by example and verbally, and I really like that. I mean, he was 30 for 50 with 342 yards, 3 touchdowns, and 0 interceptions against a really talented Michigan defense, and he really was in control this whole game. And I thought, I was surprised by it, and I thought Michigan didn't play well, in my opinion. But that's another thing. I think Michael Penix came out there and he did his job, and that's admirable. I don't know where he is on the big board of quarterbacks, but he's certainly rising.
Yeah, it's really intriguing the way this Big Ten season has played out so far. You now have, oh, by the way, the score was 38-21. Indiana did beat number 23 Michigan. I forgot to mention that at the jump. Sorry about that. But with that win, that's going to essentially knock Michigan outside of the top 25. And so right now you have Penn State, who just fell to 0-3 after this weekend, and Michigan, who's 1-2, both outside the top 25. And then you have Ohio, a matchup lingering here with Ohio State and Indiana. And I think you could potentially say that Indiana deserves a spot to be close to the top 10, if not inside it.
Yeah, for sure. They have a very legitimate claim. They've beaten 2 quality teams. It just hurts them that those 2 teams with a lot of talent have played poorly. But I think they will be top 10. I think they may be 10th, but I don't think they're going to complain about that. And you know what's interesting is their defense hasn't been great. I mean, they gave up points against Penn State. They gave up points against Rutgers even, and then they played a great game against Michigan. They made Milton and company work, and they stopped the run of what should be a very good offensive line and running game with Michigan, and they completely stonewalled it.
Yeah, speaking of stonewalling it, Michigan only had 13 total yards rushing. But another really intriguing thing for me, and something that I just don't really understand what's happening with Michigan, is their leading rusher in this game only had 6 carries for 19 yards. I just don't understand the identity shift that has happened these past few weeks with Joe Milton. He threw the ball 34 more times this weekend, and he's shown an inability to not. He's shown ability to make the big plays, but he's also shown that he has moments where he just has total lapses and makes very poor decisions. And 2 turnovers in this game for Joe Milton essentially cost them the game.
Absolutely, and that's the thing. We talked about how Michigan beat Minnesota because Minnesota couldn't stop the run game. So what makes them think that Indiana is so different from Minnesota and Michigan State, for that matter? They abandoned the run completely in both games. 6 carries for a lead rusher when they ran for over 200 yards week 1. It makes no sense. And then even more concerning to me is just like the lack of preparation and continuity. They had 5 offsides in the first quarter, and all 5 turned into first downs, and 3 of them for touchdowns, and 1 pass interference for what if it were the NFL where it's to the spot at like 40 yards. It was horrible, and they have so much talent on defense, and they're typically well coached. It makes me wonder what's going on internally, because a lot of these things are inexplicable.
Yeah, I think that leads to a very intriguing conversation that I want to delve into a little bit more in our news episode, where we have some more time to necessarily go in depth in it. But I think Jim Harbaugh is really searching for any sort of identity, and I think he's running out of time in terms of what's happening there in Michigan. Like, I think if they drop one more game, I wouldn't be surprised at all to see him out of a job. So we'll touch on that a little bit more on Tuesday. But yeah, this is another game where we touched on all the momentum was going towards Indiana, and it's one of those things in college football where the ebbs and the flows of what happens is just, it was a prime scenario for Michigan to just go out and dominate a football game and play their most complete game of the season, and that just quite frankly did not happen. They looked subpar, as to what you said, and Indiana capitalized on it and then some. I thought their defense played extremely well. When I made the pick of Indiana winning this game, I said I'm not sure if their defense can make enough plays to stop this Michigan offense, but when you're only giving up 13 yards, you're clearly doing something right to this Michigan team, and a lot of that's just those strange, like, non-willingness to run the football, but like also they made enough plays in the secondary to slow down Joe Milton and win this football game.
Absolutely.
So with that being said, we're going to move on a little bit as well. We're going to move to the Pac-12 play that happened this weekend. Arizona State kicked it off at that crazy early kickoff time that we've been talking about at 9 a.m. in Pacific time at USC. This was a really fun game. This is one of the closer games of the weekend. Arizona State looked so good for the 3.5 quarters. Seriously, like, they looked like they were unflappable. They were so well coached. Coming into this game, they were ready to go. They ran the ball straight down the throat of USC. USC could not stop the run. Jaden Daniels didn't even have to really do anything in this game to have them score, which was surprising because we touched on those were 2 true freshman running backs coming into this game. And so, but then USC really turned that script around in the last half of the fourth quarter. They scored twice within 2 minutes with an onside kick recovery, and one was kind of a crazy tip drill reception for a touchdown. And then the second one was just an absolutely beautiful throw by Keaton Slovis, fitting it in the seam into a really small window, a guy that was double covered, and he brought it in and made a tremendous catch to give the Trojans the lead, 28-27 with a little over a minute left, I think. And then Arizona State just wasn't able to keep the momentum going in their final drive to try and kick a game-winning field goal. But what did we think about this game, which was just such a good introduction to what Pac-12 football is all about?
I thought it was one of the more bizarre games of the weekend. I thought that Jaden Daniels, we talked about it going in, and we saw it last year. They like to run him out of the pocket and throw down the field. And yeah, they lost some talent in Eno Benjamin and Brandon Ayuk, but they relied so heavily on the run game, and probably that was because it was working. But in the first quarter, Marlon Tui Pelotu for USC was stopping everyone in the backfield. Like, he was a monster for the first quarter, and I was like, okay, Daniels has to win this game. And then conversely, Arizona State was making it very difficult for USC to run the ball. So I was like, okay, this is gonna be an old fashioned, just they're gonna throw the ball and see who throws better. And so I was like, okay, I think I'm gonna favor Slovis. And then all of a sudden, Arizona State was running down the throat, and they dominantly. And they get up 27-14, and it looks like they're in control. But I think they settled. I think they became complacent. They tried to go, hey, we're running the ball pretty well. Why don't we just try to be like run up the middle? And they stopped doing some of those counters, getting Trey Anum and Rashawn White to the outside. And like they were doing, they were busting big runs through that way. And USC had a very lucky play on the one where St. Brown goes up as high as he can, gets 2 fingers on the ball, and it drops into the hands of Brew McCoy. And then an onside kick that was beautiful. And then that throw to Keaton Slovis to Drake London was probably the best throw I saw all weekend.
Yeah.
Double coverage, seam route, back of the end zone. And I would say that was the best throw of the weekend, but USC was lucky, and Arizona State was incredibly well coached. I thought Herm Edwards prepared his team beautifully. I just think they became a little complacent in the end of the third quarter and most of the fourth quarter.
I would 1,000% agree with all of those takes that were just made. I think Arizona State showed that they have a winning formula happening there in their program. I think Herm Edwards is doing a really good job. And then you have Marvin Lewis, one of the better defensive minds in football, period, who's coached in the NFL for however many years, is the defensive coordinator there. And they showed that they were giving Keaton Slovis and that USC offense, which is just chock full of talent, fits for a while. And then I think USC kind of woke up a little bit, and they were like, we need to start playing a little bit better. We need to start forcing the ball downfield and making the throws to win the games. And their talent showed up. You know what I mean? Like they have everything that they need to be a very explosive offense. I just think I would be very surprised if I saw them come out the same way that they did, because I remember we were texting about this game, and I had an opinion that like USC looked undisciplined in a lot of this game. I think they had some silly penalties. There's just this aura around them. Whenever they would get up from like a tackle, they would be like all feisty with the Arizona State tackler. It looked to me for early in the third quarter that USC was playing individual football. They weren't necessarily trying to win as a team. They were trying to make the big play happen themselves and try and do too much. But with that being said, that all kind of turned on its head. And then at the end, when they had 2 beautiful touchdown drives and an onside kick recovery that couldn't have gone any better for them. So they made the plays that they needed to down the stretch to win the football game. I just think Arizona State really came out and said, we're a talent in this Pac-12 South Division. They're going to be good for a long time with the program that they've established. And yeah, I just think this was a much close. Obviously, it was a close game, but it honestly was teetering on the point of not being a close game in favor of Arizona State if they didn't settle, like you touched on.
One of the things that I thought was bizarre in this game, that the reason I said weird earlier, is Arizona State seemed so much better coached in the game. And like you said, it was individual. I thought USC was playing with this like, hey, I need to make this big play. Like, they don't want to make any like 7-yard plays that weigh on you, you know. And USC has such a good line and a running game, and it was being stopped early, but they just completely abandoned it and made Slovis have to deal with the pass rush. And they seem to be like, oh, well, I want my stats. Like, so I feel like there was designated plays. Like, Drake London was the only player on USC that I thought really ran his routes every single time. Amon-Ra St. Brown, in my opinion, is the most talented receiver in all of the Pac-12. And he showed up in the game. But there were plays where he tried to block. He made this one play that was an incredible block on a corner named Jack Jones on Arizona State, knocked him out of bounds. And if he continued blocking, it could have been a 30-yard gain. Instead, it was a stop of 6 because he just gave up and flexed on the sideline. I thought there were so many displays of immaturity for USC that it was almost a shame that they came away winning the game. Slovis was phenomenal. That throw was next level, and he kept his head in the game and maybe motivated his troops. But even in those two drives, those were both fourth downs and distance, and they were really struggling. And they just came up with two big plays, one lucky and one beautiful.
I agree. One last thing I want to touch on in this one is when Arizona State got the ball back with a little under a minute and a half left to go try and kick a game-winning field goal, they were kind of rolling a little bit. They had a little bit of momentum. Jaden Daniels was completing some good passes, and then there was a catch that was near the sideline. It was close, but they ruled it a catch. And then the next play got snapped and ran, and it was a completion for a first down. But the refs came in after that play was over and said the play never happened because replay buzzed down to take a look at the sideline catch. And just in my understanding of the rule book, like, if it doesn't necessarily matter when replay buzzes down, it's when the play is blown dead by the referee. Like, I never realized that, like, if like the replay guys buzz down and the play's not dead, I always thought if you got the snap off, like, the play's live. Like, you can't go back and change that. Do you know what I mean? Like, wasn't that just kind of like an odd play?
I thought it was poorly communicated for sure. I'm not sure if they just meant to stop it and Arizona State was just going fast and they didn't realize it. But yeah, no, I thought that for sure they should have at least explained what happened, because we were kind of left wondering, and the commentators did the explaining, and they were guessing too. They said, well, must be what happened because the play didn't count. But yeah, no, it was bizarre play. I thought it certainly should have been communicated better, and I'm not sure I understand the Pac-12 specific rendition of the rules well enough to tell you that it was legal or illegal.
And it's one of those things that probably took 12, 13 yards off the drive, and then it went from what was going to be a first down with all the momentum in the world, clock stopped, to an incomplete pass. They ruled it incomplete after that, and so it's 2nd and 10 from 12 yards further back. So, and that was kind of like the momentum halter. Like, it was a long review, and then Arizona State just wasn't able to get it going after that. They ended up not converting a 4th and 10. They didn't get another yard after that. So it was just one of those interesting plays where it's not going to show up in any sort of box score, but it was just a complete difference maker for the way that those last 4 plays kind of finished out. So probably nothing like super egregious, but it's one of those things where I didn't necessarily understand the rule to the best of the ability. And so I think it will be one of those things that's really intriguing to look up and say, what happened here if the Pac-12 were to ever, like, release a statement about it, because it just seemed off, in my opinion. And so yeah, it was one of those scenarios, I guess. Let's move on a little bit to the 7:30 game. It was like bookend Pac-12 football today with really good matchups. Unranked Stanford went into number 12 Oregon and played the Ducks there in Autzen Stadium without fans. What do we think about this game? Do we think so? Let's preface this with Stanford came into this game, and then a couple hours before kickoff, we got the news that their starting quarterback Davis Mills was not going to play, and a couple other starters on the offensive and defensive side of the ball. So they were shorthanded before the opening kickoff even started. But what did we see in this one?
Well, first off, I think that really marred the game a little bit, because the game itself was well played. And the fact that Mills especially couldn't go, Weddington's a really good playmaker on the outside as well. But because Mills couldn't play, the playbook was so simplified for Stanford that Oregon could cheat in and put 8 in the box and say, well, Jack West, whose only other start was disastrous against UCLA, 15 for 32 with like only 140 yards, and almost all of those came in garbage time in that event. I think they knew he's not going to beat us over the top. We're going to put 8 in the box. And Stanford still was able to move the ball. And throughout the first half, they showed the ability to run, and they ran for 200 yards in this game. So I think the score line wasn't indicative of how it was. I don't think everyone should say, oh, wow, Oregon played a dominant game. And I think Oregon got better as the game went on. Their offensive line got better, and Joe Moorhead's system that you brought up, that it reminded me of Penn State. I mean, obviously they didn't have Saquon Barkley, but I thought the Tyler Shoke, their quarterback, got better as it went on. because he learned how to read the option, and he's mobile. And CJ Verdell was 20 for 105 yards and a touchdown and a couple big catches. So this game was more even than people thought. And I understand completely if people say that I'm crazy because I said that Jet Toner was a more reliable kicker than Camden Lewis. Camden Lewis also missed his field goal. So we went 0 for 5 on field goals today. I just want to give a little disclaimer before Jet Toner hate gets going. He broke his leg last year covering a kickoff. He made a tackle and he got rolled over. And all reports had said he was doing really well. So his track record entering that game is he'd only missed 10 field goals in his entire career through 3 seasons, 47 of 57. And he went 0 for 4. So I really felt for the guy. And I really felt for Jack West because he did a good job moving Stanford down the field, like controlling the game, no turnovers at all. And throughout this game, and no sacks. The offensive lines, both sides, were incredible. So I thought Stanford got a bad rap because they had to change their game plan drastically. And it was unfortunate that instead of being like up 13-7 at the very least with 2 of those field goals, they kick it off after missing another field goal. The defense is crestfallen. You could see they showed this photo of the huddle and Toner's basically in tears, and they've got another guy just on the defense like, oh man, like now we got to go back out there and stop CJ Verdell. And I thought that was the turning point. Instead of being up 13-7 after 2 missed field goals and a punt when they were in field goal range, it turned into 14-7 with Oregon getting the ball back. And that game was never going to be won then. But you got to put points up on the board, and it sucks the way it went down. But it was an interesting game. And I think Oregon's very good. Their defense showed they've got a lot of talent, but they need to grow as a unit.
Yeah, I think they're only going to get better as this year progresses. I think they just replaced so much with those, and they were coming in with so much hype around their defense with that secondary that was supposed to be like all worldly. It was going to be so good, and then three of the 4 opted out. They showed that they still are a very reliable program, especially probably one of the best in the Pac-12. They're so well coached on both sides of the football, on defense and on offense and on special teams. They play all 3 phases of the game really well. I think CJ Verdell is going to be one of those guys that is a Travis Etienne for them in this year that they just rely upon. And they're just like that's going to be a fairly consistent number, I think, of 20 carries a game. He's just a workhorse for them. But also when you look past that, you have Travis Dye and Habibi Likio, who all scored touchdowns in this game, not to mention Shaw looked really good running the football. He had 88 yards and ran for a touchdown. And you touched on it, he only got better in the read option game as the game progressed. So it's going to be one of those things to watch if you're an Oregon fan. The final score ended up being 35-14, but it was one of those games that like once Stanford was unable to make their field goals and convert points in those first couple drives, like they had a chance to be leading this game and be pushing Oregon to say like we're here and we're ready to pull the upset. Like if you guys aren't ready to play, but I just think the lack of points in those scenarios really plagued Stanford, and that turned into one of those things where it was unsurmountable at that point with how much Stanford was missing. So it was a fun game to watch. Kirk Herbstreit and Chris Fowler are always fun to watch in that scenario. But yeah, it was a good one. It was a good weekend to open up with in Pac-12 play.
For sure. And then one more thing I wanted to touch on that you brought up right there is when we outlined Penn State, and we talked about this last podcast in the case of Stanford and Oregon. When we outlined Penn State and Ohio State, we said Penn State has to score, and when they're in the red zone, they have to score 7, not 3. They have to not have turnovers, and they have to win the turnover battle because if you go equal possessions, Fields is going to outduel against Clifford in all odds, right? So all these things still applied to Stanford, and I mentioned this last podcast, our last episode. And I think Stanford, they won the turnover battle 2-0. They got an interception and a forced fumble, and they moved the ball better in the first half. And so you could conceivably say Stanford will be up 17-7 at 3 minutes left in the second quarter. They one of those field goals, they decided not to. They played extremely conservatively, trying to kick a field goal. And they didn't gain a yard. They got stuffed on a 3rd and 7, tried to kick a 48-yarder, missed it, and then the next drive they decided, oh, we're not going to kick. and then another one where they kick. So if they make 2 or 3 field goals, that's 13. If they score a touchdown on one and don't even make another one, that's 17. And I thought you got to come out with something. We said we got to come out with 7, but they came out with 0, and we're still winning the game in terms of field position. And I just felt that Oregon looks dominant with the scoreline and the rushing yards they had, but I think that was just a breaking point. I think that shorthanded Stanford they gave it their best punch, and it was just let down from special teams, which is rare for a Stanford team. And an Oregon team is very good in special teams too. And I think neither special teams performed, and it's kind of a sad way to have a game flip a script. And I really wanted to outline that it wasn't as one-sided as it seemed.
For sure. Speaking of one-sided, Friday night, BYU showed that they are very much a legitimate powerhouse in the college football spectrum this season. Zach Wilson is that guy. He threw 21 of 27 for 359 yards and 2 touchdowns in a 51-17 rout of Boise State. We touched on Hank Brockmere and Holani, their starting running back, out for this game for Boise State. It also didn't help that Jack Sears went out in their first series of the game. So Boise State started basically on their first drive with their third string quarterback in the game. The kid played well. I really was impressed with how well the third stringer for Boise State really kind of hung in there for the first half of the football game. There was just a second half bludgeoning for BYU. They really scored and didn't hold back because they knew they needed to make a performance. I said they couldn't just win this game. They needed to dominate Boise State, and they did exactly that.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, like you said, it was 7-3 for a lot of this game. And then once the third quarter hit, I think they were up 16-3 at that point. They went on a 22-0 third quarter, and mid-third quarter, you could feel it was over, and it could have been worse. I think Boise State was unfortunate, and a lot of these things are kind of hard to predict because you get some injuries, and you know about some injuries, but then something happens in the game with Sears, and you have coronavirus with some of these tests, like the Stanford one as well. George Pickens didn't show up for Georgia. And I think Boise State was missing 4 defensive starters that we were unaware of because they just don't disclose it right now. It's an odd time, and it was a poor game and I also feel bad for BYU in this case because they showed that they can play football and they're really good. They should be respected. But anyone's going to say, oh, the only team you've played is Boise State, and Boise State's not going to be in the top 25 anymore, probably. And they didn't have anyone playing. So I wish we could have seen a healthy game because I think, one, it would have been a better game. But 2, if Boise State BYU came out and played as well as they did, because they played a good game after the first quarter, like a really, really good game, that they would have gained more respect nationally. And I think they deserve it, especially because Zach Wilson played and he proved us wrong. He played very well against this talented and cohesive defense.
Yeah, I just think, like, we talked with Penix Jr. about he is just the heartbeat of this BYU team in general, regardless of the side of the football. He's that guy, right? He's athletic. He can run. He has a beautiful, beautiful arm. He can throw the ball so well. I've been high on this kid actually ever since I saw him play Utah for the first time. I said this guy is legit. He's very good, and the progression that he's made since that year to now is something that needs to be respected and admired. I think it's truly one of the more like positive things about what we see in college football is you see a prospect come in like this and he has all the hype around him. He has a couple bad performances, but that doesn't deter him in the process of developing. And now you see him absolutely reaping the rewards, and you have him on people's Heisman lists, which I'm not necessarily sure he's like above some of the other quarterbacks that are in the game now, but he is really good. Like, he's straight up just a very solid football player, and he really makes this BYU team run. I think without him, it's a much different team, but that's not an issue now because he's on their roster and he's making a difference. How many quarterbacks would you put above Zach Wilson? We were talking about this on Twitter a little bit that night, and I said, ask me on Sunday who I thought was better, Zach Wilson or Kyle Trask, and I'm now posing that question back to you as it is now Sunday.
It's slightly unfair because I was planning to ask you, but I think Kyle Trask is better at throwing the football and making decisions. I think Zach Wilson might have more dynamism. Like I talked about for Stanford, that losing Davis Mills took away their entire playbook. What makes BYU an offense so special is the entire playbook is Zach Wilson can do everything. And I think he's got the legs and he can roll out and make plays that Trask can't make. I just think Trask is a really good decision maker and he's got crazy good weapons. So if you put everyone on equal playing fields, that may be a different discussion. But based off what I'm seeing, I think I'd take Trask. But let me ask you this: how many quarterbacks would you take above Wilson? So I'm assuming you'd say Trevor, whether it's the draft or the NFL draft or who you just think's better in college. I assume you're going to take Trevor Lawrence and Justin Fields, but who else, if anyone else?
Yeah, so it's a really good question. It's an interesting one at that for sure. You have those two. Absolutely. They're locks. I think is an interesting point to just kind of touch on, but for me it would be Justin Fields and then Trevor Lawrence. And then I'm just so high on Justin Fields. I think he's phenomenal.
Is this for the draft or just college football? Just as a matter of clarification.
Yeah, just college football. So I'm going Justin Fields, Trevor Lawrence. I'd probably put Trask up there, but Mac Jones I think is number 3 for me. I almost completely forgot about him. He's an absolute stud down there at Bama. I think Kyle Trask is probably 4, and I'd put Zach Wilson in there at the 5, possibly the 6 if you could give me one other name that really wows me. But as of right now, I think he's like he very much has a claim to the top 5 of best college quarterbacks right now. But there's also people that are in his camp that have a like, oh, what about me? You know what I mean? And there's also so many young players that still need to develop, but where he's at definitely needs to be in the top 5 discussion for sure.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think I have slightly different rankings. I think Trevor Lawrence, as I've said a few times, is the best player in college football and has been for a few years. I'd go Lawrence, Fields. I think Mac Jones is better than Trask, but I think it's also his weapons are even better than Trask's. And then I'd go Trask, Wilson. And then you've got the guy from North Dakota State who's an NFL draft guy, but he's not playing the season. So, but I just want to clarify that that's why there's going to be another quarterback on draft boards. If there are any fans of this show that are NFL guys, that's who we're leaving out. And I think it's fair because Zach Wilson's doing it right now, and it's not just all potential.
Yeah.
I think I agree with your board.
Right on. So we're going to move on to some interesting points that we saw throughout the weekend. Michigan State came into this week after beating their rival Michigan the week before, and they got dismantled, but lost by over 40 to 0-2 Iowa. How can we justify that after playing such a complete performance against their rival?
I think there are two thoughts, and I think both apply. I think one, Michigan State played their best game of the season already against Michigan. I think they, rivalry games do that sometimes. And 2, I think Iowa is far better than 0-2 indicates. They lost a nail scraper, a barn burner against Purdue in week 1 that they probably should have won. And then they were up big against Northwestern and blew that game. And in the past 10 years, Iowa under Kirk Ferentz has been a very good football program, underrated one. In 2016, they made the Rose Bowl. And I think that they were bound to play better. I didn't think they'd win by 40, though. That one's a little inexplicable. And I think it was just like they rode the highs of beating Michigan, and they came out flat, and then Iowa came out really ready to go because they'd blown a few games. I think it was kind of back against the wall and a trap game, and you saw what happened.
For sure. Moving forward quickly, we're going to talk about this one much more in depth on Tuesday, but University of Utah's home opener was canceled due to the program not being able to meet the league minimum of 53 scholarship players due to COVID outbreaks in the program. This came as a complete shock to everyone who is in around Utah football. It was just one of those things where all people had heard is we're handling the virus. We're doing everything that we need to do. And then the day before the game shows up and they can't even meet 53 scholarship players. I was just completely shocked at this news. I was a little angry. I was just like, how can you let something like this go for that long? Because there's no way that they all woke up on Friday morning with COVID without testing positive before that. So what, like, just real quick, your thoughts on that scenario?
Yeah, I know. I mean, I texted you the news of when it broke, and I kind of had the same reaction. It just didn't make sense to me because, interestingly enough, I was interviewing a guy who works for a local radio station for the University of Utah, and he was talking about how ready they were to go and how well they've been doing coronavirus tests, and for the longest time they've had no positives. And just 2 hours later, they have not enough players to play a football game. And so that, I don't know, it rubs me the wrong way that we weren't told anything. And I think that's frankly irresponsible. So we'll unpack this for sure later. And there's a lot more to learn as we learn it too. But that was my initial reaction.
Penn State, we touched on earlier, falls to 0-3 on the season. They lost at home to Maryland as they came in at least 27, I think it was, point favorites in this game. I think it might have been more like 21, but they were heavily favored by at least 3 scores in this football game, and they lost 35-19. Sean Clifford just looks absolutely lost at quarterback there for Penn State.
I don't know. I feel bad for him. I think the loss of some of their running backs has really impacted him, and I think he's forced some throws. And what do you think the issue is with Penn State as a whole?
I think they're just like constantly, each week they've gotten a little bit worse. I don't think they're making any strides in the right direction, quite frankly. I just think you look at it, you break down the team as to like what they were envisioning this season of going like, and then you take away a player like Micah Parsons, and they lose all their dynamic potential on defense. Like it's silly to say, but he was that kind of football player. He was so good and a keystone for that defense. And so now they're just kind of trying to find their identity on the defensive side of the ball. They can't really get stops. You saw Maryland take 2 slants for 40 and then 70 yards for touchdowns. Like that just can't happen in a football game. And they're quickly down 14-0. And then you have this quarterback who lost again to Ohio State with not a great performance. And then he is down 14-0. And he's like, I got to go win this football game with my arm. Because like you touched on, they're short at weapons at running back. So there's just a lot that you could talk about, but I just think they're trying to do way too much. They need to simplify the game a little bit, and they're a little bit lost at the current moment. So it's tough to see, but their season's pretty much gone from here on out. It's just pretty much getting people experience. So speaking of flipping the switch on that, of not a season that's done it in the slightest, Cincinnati rolling again this weekend. They beat a good Houston team 38-10. When are we going to start seeing them in that conversation for the top 5?
I think they should be. I think what will happen, if I had to give my prediction, I would say, as I laid out earlier, it'll be Bama, Notre Dame, or Ohio State. I think you present a good point that Notre Dame's they've played more, so they might as well. But those 2 will be 2 and 3. I think 4 will be Clemson. I think 5 will be Florida this week because they beat Georgia and they jumped from 8 to 5. And I think Cincinnati's going to go at 6. I think they have a claim to be 5, though. They've dominated. And I think they're as much of a lock every week to win and win big. Like I was talking with one of my friends that if you had to pick someone to cover every week, my bet is Cincinnati because they play great defense and they score an absurd amount of points. That's a good recipe. And I think that's a good recipe down the road too. And I hope they're the New Year's 6 representative. I think they're better than BYU as a non-Power 5 conference team.
I actually don't disagree with that at all. I disagree that Florida doesn't jump them. I think it's this week that Cincinnati slides up into that number 5 spot, and I think Florida follows them at number 6. I think it would be very telling as to where the committee and the AP views Cincinnati, if they put Florida above them or not. But at this point, if you're looking at it from the naked eye, from my perspective, I don't know how you can deny them this opportunity when you see a Florida team who's already lost a football game, and you have this Cincinnati team that's just dismantled everyone that has been put in front of them. So I think it's this week that they have the right to say we're the 5th best team in the country, and they just continue to look dominant. Another topic we're going to touch on real quick. We're going to also cover a little bit more on Tuesday, the developing story that we've touched on in our last news episode. The University of Wisconsin started doing light football activities after they had so many COVID cases. We have no news on their game this week at this time, so hopefully we have something further for you on Tuesday. But they are starting to pick back up some light football activities. So signs of life there from the Wisconsin program. And then we're gonna make the last three little points as our fun ones. Coastal Carolina improves to 7-0. Marshall improves to 6-0. And Liberty, I think most impressively, we gave them a shout out moving into the top 25. Their biggest game of the week was this week with playing Power 5 Virginia Tech in the ACC, and they beat them. They're 8-0 now. So I think they proved they are a legitimate team, and they have their biggest hurdle past them.
Yeah, for sure. And it was kind of funny. I talked with one of my friends about, I thought Liberty would beat Virginia Tech, and I almost bet on it. And I was like, I don't know, because I'm the ultimate fan of underdogs. I love a good Cinderella, and I didn't have the chutzpah to put that one out there, but it happened, and I was pretty hyped nonetheless. So good for the little guys. You don't see this often in college football. Sometimes in college basketball they get on display, but great job to those schools, and I'm really happy to see them thriving and getting notoriety.
Absolutely. And then we're going to close out the show today with our pick results. I had a decent performance, 6-3. I lost that Arizona State. I picked Arizona State over USC and lost the squeaker there. It broke my heart a little bit, but it was a very solid performance from Arizona State nonetheless. But USC just made the plays they needed to. Boise State, we both picked over BYU. That didn't pan out too well for us. And then Clemson, we both picked over Notre Dame, which was that thriller. You went a little bit. We went a little bit different, and it panned out my favorite this week. 4-5 for you.
I think coronavirus kind of messed with me a little bit this week. Luckily I'm staying safe, but a lot of the teams I took got hit. I mean, Stanford's quarterback was out, their receiver was out, George Pickens didn't make a trip, and I don't know what happened with Boise State. That hit both of us, but it didn't look good for me at all. I'm not going to lie, but at least I was closer on the Clemson Notre Dame thing. So that gives me a little bit of solace.
You have something to hang your hat on there.
Yeah. I mean, I'll take a 2-game deficit. We got some weeks to go.
Yeah, for sure. So 6-3 for Scott, 4-5 for Leif, and we'll see what the slate brings us for next weekend. All right, everyone, that's going to do it for us this week. This recap episode. Thank you so much for tuning in. We really appreciate the support, the feedback, everything that you guys have given is just really appreciated from both of us. I know that for sure. And make sure moving forward that you're always reaching out to us. We have our lines of communication are always open to talk about this stuff. So we're doing this just as fun to bring all you the best information that we possibly can find. And so, yeah, just make sure to hit us up if we ever want to hear about anything that we might not be covering, any storyline that you want to have like digressed a little bit. So yeah.
And yeah, no, as you said, just please let us know. And then also, we don't only cover college football. We're going to cover college basketball for you as well. And that's right around the corner. So anything on that regard as well, please let us know. And we look forward to bringing you the best of both as they both start happening up in the next coming weeks.
Yeah, we're going to have to start producing more shows or running way too long. But anyway, we got a lot to look forward to moving forward as we start November here in the football season. Only good things from here on out. So that's going to do it for Leif and I on this episode. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll see y'all on Tuesday. All right.
Thank you.